At my own wedding, while everyone else was raising their glasses, my dad slid a crisp envelope into my hands, a disownment letter. My mom announced it like a toast, smiling for the room. My sister lifted her phone to record my shock for entertainment, zooming in, as if my heartbreak were content she'd been dying to post. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just thanked them, folded the papers, and walked out of the restaurant in my wedding dress, while 100 eyes followed me. They thought they'd destroyed me in front of an audience. What they didn't know was that I had already moved the ground beneath their feet long before they tried to cut me out of their lives. My name is Erilyn Frost, and this is the night everything snapped. But before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my voice matters to you, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means more than you know, especially on nights when the world turns its back and you still have to stand up and speak your truth. The moment I stepped into Silvercrest Mountain Lodge, wrapped in the soft white hush of falling snow and the glow of amber lights, I felt it an icy prickle under my skin that didn't match the warmth of the room. It should have been the happiest day of my life, but something in the air felt staged, too polished, too quiet in the wrong places. I kept reminding myself I was Erilyn Frost, 26, a landscape designer who had carved out a life far from the suffocating expectations of the Frost name. I had fought for independence, identity, and boundaries, yet as I stood there in my wedding dress, I felt the old gravity pulling at me again. The first pull came from my father, Donovan Frost, striding into the lodge like a judge entering court. His eyes weren't those of a proud father. They were cold, calculating, as if he had come to carry out a sentence. My mother, Mirella, floated in behind him, smiling with that perfectly curated expression she wore for business galas and charity galas. Even her happiness felt manufactured, held up by years of practice and a devotion to appearances. Seraphine, my younger sister, barely gave me a glance before lifting her phone, already streaming, whispering into her mic, as though my wedding was just another backdrop for her online persona. I could feel the camera lens grazing across my face every time Mother mentioned words like duty or responsibility, as if Seraphine was waiting for a crack to show. Then came the small, sharp moments, Mother smoothing my hair with the precision of someone adjusting a display piece, murmuring, "Don't forget you're a Frost even today." My father checking his phone every few seconds, not with impatience, but anticipation, like a man waiting for a cue. The quiet whispers between them, short-clipped, conspiratorial. When I caught one line, "This is the right moment," a thin shiver traced my spine. And then Carson's family arrived. The contrast hit me hard. His parents greeted me with genuine warmth, their presence steady and unhurried, nothing like the Frosts who carried tension like a second skin. Carson reached for my hand, and the gentleness in that gesture grounded me for a breath. It reminded me there was love in the room, just not from the people who were supposed to give it first. Still, as I walked toward the altar, veil trailing behind me, I felt something tighten beneath my ribs. A whisper inside me said to pay attention, that today would not unfold like any wedding I'd ever imagined. And I was right. The reception at Larkspur Hall glittered under the glass ceiling, the snowy Rockies glowing in the distance like a painted backdrop. The Carson family filled the room with laughter and warmth, but my nerves hummed beneath the surface, a rhythm only I could hear. And then the hum sharpened. I was holding the cake knife when my father walked onto the small stage, a red envelope in hand, its color far too ominous for the occasion. Conversations dimmed around the hall. People whispered, assuming it was money, a family blessing, or some Frost-style grand gesture. My mother seized the microphone before he spoke, her voice bright and wide for the guests. A special gift from all of us to Erilyn. Her eyes found mine with a satisfaction that tightened my chest. Seraphine was suddenly beside me, phone inches from my cheek, capturing every flicker of expression. That was when I noticed the tiny icon on her screen. She wasn't just recording, she was live streaming. The entire moment was a performance, and I was the spectacle. When my father handed me the envelope, his hand trembled just enough for me to notice, though his posture stayed stern, ceremonial. Like he was sentencing me, not celebrating me. I opened it, the room spinning softly at the edges. Inside was a disownment letter, signed by all three of them. My parents were officially severing responsibility for me. I was removed from the Frost inheritance, and Seraphine, my own sister, had added her signature with a heart drawn next to her name. I didn't have time to fully register the sting before Seraphine leaned in and whispered low, but perfectly angled for her mic. "Are you shocked? Hundreds of thousands are watching." It hit me then, this wasn't just cruelty, it was entertainment. Mother added the final cut. "We just want you to know your place before entering the Carson family." Her voice carried across the hall with such ease it almost sounded kind. The guests froze. Some gasped. Carson stepped forward, fury tightening his posture, but I lifted a hand, stopping him. Because for the first time, everything felt clear. I saw with painful precision that they had never loved me, not as a daughter, not as anything but a utility. I didn't break. Instead, something inside me aligned. I smiled, steady and sharp. "Thank you," I said, folding the papers with deliberate calm. "I understand." Then I turned, walked out of Larkspur Hall with the disownment letter in hand, and let the heavy doors fall closed behind me. Everyone thought I was running away in shock, but I wasn't. I was walking toward a plan I had crafted long before they ever thought to cut me out. The cold hallway outside Larkspur Hall felt sharper than the snow earlier that day, and as I walked farther from the music and laughter, memories rose inside me like dust shaken from an old rug. It was unsettling how easily the night's cruelty fit into the story of my life, as if the Frost family had been rehearsing for this moment for years. I grew up in a house where the rules were carved, not spoken. I was never allowed to question decisions. The firstborn, yes, but not the chosen one. That position belonged to Seraphine before she could even walk. She was the center, the priority, the one whose tears moved mountains and whose whims dictated the rhythm of the household. I was the one who filled the gaps, the one who stepped aside, the one expected to be grateful for the honor of sacrificing. I remembered being 15 when Mother took away my bedroom to convert it into a filming studio for Seraphine's early social media dreams. I was moved into the storage room beside the laundry, a place that smelled of detergent and cardboard. When I protested, Donovan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "Sacrifice builds character. This is how you become a true Frost." I believed him back then. I thought obedience would earn love someday. It never did. Another memory surfaced, stinging like winter air. I was 22 when my mom took the used car I had worked 2 jobs to buy. She handed the keys to Seraphine without hesitation. When I protested, she accused me of selfishness and said family shares, especially with someone who needs it more than you. The implication was clear. Seraphine needed everything. I was expected to need nothing. Somewhere between those years and now, there had been a moment, small but unforgettable, when Mother said, "Nothing you own will ever truly be yours if you insist on keeping this last name." At the time, it sounded like a philosophical warning. Now, on my wedding night, it felt like the blueprint of their control. The memory that hurt the most came from 2 years ago, when I discovered that the inheritance my grandmother left specifically for me had been quietly redirected to Seraphine. When I confronted my parents, Donovan simply said, "You were never the family's investment. We chose differently." That sentence never left me. Maybe it never will. I let out a breath as I reached the end of the hallway because the truth was simple. Nothing they did tonight was new. It was just louder, more public, more vicious. Then my mind jumped to the moment 2 months before the wedding when they handed me that document and agreement stating that all Frost assets, including anything under my name, were to be considered family property. They expected me to sign without question to walk into marriage with nothing of my own. That was the moment the final thread inside me snapped. I walked straight into a law office that same afternoon, the ink from their demanded signature still drying on my hands. I remembered gripping my bag so tightly that my knuckles went white as I explained everything to a lawyer who didn't even blink. She listened, nodded, and said, "You don't need to win their approval. You need to protect what's yours." That was when my plan began. Quiet, deliberate, inevitable. They thought they stripped me tonight. They thought they took away my place, my name, my inheritance. What they never understood was that their years of taking taught me exactly how to guard myself. They believed they were pulling the rug out from under me. But I was already standing somewhere else, entirely. They thought they had taken everything. They didn't know they had built the person who learned how to take it back. Carson caught up to me outside the hall, his hand warm on my arm. He asked if I was all right, and I told him I just needed air. That wasn't a lie. I needed air, but I needed clarity more. I needed to remind myself of everything I had put in place long before this night. As the cold bit into my skin, my mind drifted back to the 28th floor of Summit Legal Group in downtown Denver. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished stone floors, the hum of printers, the faint scent of coffee. Those details were burned into my memory. I remembered the weight in my chest as I entered the office for the first time, feeling like I was betraying something sacred, even though I knew the real betrayal had been happening for years. The week before that appointment, I had overheard my parents in the home office discussing how to reassign my remaining assets. My savings, the investments I had been building since college, even the small condo I had bought on my own, they were planning to funnel everything into Donovan's failing business ventures. Hearing them reduce my life to a financial patch felt like having the ground ripped from under me. That was when I stopped seeing them as parents and started seeing them as people who viewed me as a resource. The lawyer explained that if I signed the document making all assets family property, every cent with my name on it would become accessible to the Frost Family Trust. Once I married Carson, the trust could even override joint accounts. I would be trapped financially the same way I'd been trapped emotionally. So I created my own trust, Frostborn Trust, my grandmother's inheritance, my investments, my savings. A private account no Frost had ever known existed. The structure was airtight. Anyone who cut ties with me forfeited any legal right to challenge or claim it. Carson was the first person I told. I remembered sitting across from him in the lawyer's office, my hands shaking as I explained everything. He didn't flinch. He didn't judge. He just reached across the table, placed his hand on mine, and said, "If you need someone to stand with you, I'm here. Always." He signed as a witness without hesitation. The memory faded as I stared at the notifications buzzing on my phone. My lawyer had sent several messages. Documentation finalized. Actions initiated. Their signatures tonight have legal effect. I felt a strange calm spread through me. For them, tonight had been a spectacle, a punishment, an attempt to shame me into obedience. But for me, it was mathematics, quiet, precise, already calculated. When they handed me that disownment letter on stage, they weren't cutting me out of anything. They were cutting themselves out of what they had tried to steal. I straightened my shoulders, the cold no longer biting but bracing. I wasn't breaking. I wasn't running. I wasn't defeated. I was ready for whatever came next. Because for the first time in my life, the Frosts weren't the ones holding power. I was. Back at the hotel, the moment Carson and I stepped into our room, his phone lit up like a warning flare. Message after message poured in from his friends, each one sending the same screenshot: Seraphine's live stream, my sister smiling into her front camera as she announced to the internet that her trash sister got disowned on her wedding day. Hearing those words felt strangely familiar, like echoes of every quiet humiliation I'd swallowed growing up. What was different this time was the scale. The internet was now the stage my family chose, believing they could choreograph the narrative the way they always had. But the internet is never loyal to the script of cruel people. I sat on the edge of the bed watching the stream replay from dozens of angles. Instead of cheering her on, comments flooded in, accusing the Frost family of being heartless. People dug into old clips of Seraphine mocking classmates, laughing at animals in distress, bragging about getting whatever she wanted. Other users turned their attention to Donovan's business, uncovering rumors, lawsuits, and questionable decisions he'd managed to keep quiet for years. The platform they used to shame me was now exposing them. As the chaos spread, my inbox chimed with a new email from my lawyer. The message was short and decisive. The disownment letter had been verified by the county clerk. Because it had been voluntarily signed by Donovan Morella and Seraphine, it immediately triggered the clauses protecting Frostborn Trust. They had willingly stripped themselves of any legal claim to my assets. I leaned back, exhaling. They thought they had blindsided me, but they were the ones who had signed their own exclusion. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Morella. I answered only to hear her voice sharp and trembling, a mixture of rage and panic. She demanded to know when I had created the trust why she hadn't been informed, and how I could hide something like that from my family. Her words came out rapid and frantic, as though she were losing air. Before she could continue, I ended the call. There was nothing left to say to a woman who had chosen spectacle over motherhood. Minutes later, a text from Donovan appeared. He accused me of destroying the Frost reputation, telling me to dismantle the trust and restore the family balance. For the first time in my life, reading his threats didn't even make my heartbeat rise. I felt still, calm. He wasn't the immovable force I had once feared. He was a man trying to salvage control slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Seraphine went live again, crying, insisting I had orchestrated some elaborate revenge to make the family look bad. But her words betrayed her. She complained about losing sponsors, about being unfollowed, about comments calling her privileged and cruel. She didn't speak once about my well-being or the pain she contributed to. And viewers noticed. I watched the chaos unfold with a clarity I had never allowed myself before. Tonight, my family hadn't just lost access to a trust, they had lost the shiny facade they spent years polishing. The world was finally seeing them the way I had always known them. Carson came to sit beside me, taking my hand. When I finally looked at him, he said softly, "They're the ones falling apart, not you." And he was right. The battle had shifted. It was no longer just between me and them. It was legal. It was public. It was bigger now. And for once, the truth was on my side. 2 days later, a message arrived from the Frost family group chat, one I'd been added to against my will years ago. They demanded a family meeting at Mountain View Cafe. The tone wasn't conciliatory. It was commanding, as though I were a wayward employee summoned by her superiors. I agreed to go, not for reconciliation, but because I wanted to end this on my terms. Carson came with me, along with my lawyer, who sat quietly but alert, letting the Frosts see I wasn't walking into this blind. When we arrived, my family was already seated in a booth at the back. Donovan stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Morella's makeup couldn't hide the deepened lines around her eyes. Seraphine looked pale, her phone on the table, but turned face down for once. The air felt tense, thick, as if everyone sensed something irreversible had begun. Donovan opened the meeting with a demand I was to sign a document nullifying the disownment letter. He claimed it had been symbolic, something done in anger, something they never meant to carry legal weight. But I saw the truth in their eyes. They were terrified. They wanted back what they had lost. I told them calmly that I had no intention of returning to Frost Family Trust. I explained that I had established Frostborn Trust months ago, independent and protected. For the first time ever, My voice didn't shake in front of them. My lawyer laid out the facts with surgical precision. Because all three Frosts had signed the disownment willingly, the clause had activated permanently. They were now legally barred from contesting or accessing any part of my trust or assets. Donovan's face drained of color. Morella's hand flew to her mouth. Seraphine whispered something under her breath that sounded like disbelief. Morella leaned forward, asking when I had created the trust. I answered without wavering. The same day you asked me to sign away my independence. Her expression cracked for a moment, revealing something rawer than anger-fear. I reached into my folder and placed documents on the table, printed emails, bank statements, and the transfer slip where my grandmother's inheritance had been moved under Seraphine's name. Morella flinched. Seraphine's eyes widened, turning quickly toward her mother. The dynamic between them shifted instantly, blame ricocheting across the table. Donovan tried to regain control by threatening to expose private details about my life, attempting to intimidate me back into compliance. I set my phone on the table and played an audio file, their conversation about siphoning my savings to bail out Donovan's failing company. The silence afterward felt heavier than the mountains outside. Carson leaned forward, then meeting Donovan's glare with unwavering resolve. He said that he would defend me and make sure no threat, no manipulation would ever touch me again. Donovan looked away, unable to hold his gaze. The meeting unraveled after that. Seraphine pushed back from the booth, crying loudly enough for nearby tables to stare. Donovan slammed his palm on the table before storming out. Morella reached for my hand, asking to speak privately, but I pulled back and told her no. As we walked out of the cafe, I realized that what happened wasn't a confrontation, it was a collapse. Years of manipulation, control, and entitlement had buckled under their own weight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one unraveling. They were. By the time Carson and I pulled into our driveway after the meeting at Mountain View Cafe, all I wanted was to peel off my shoes and let the night slip off my shoulders. But before I could even step out of them, Carson looked toward the window and said quietly, "They're here." I moved slowly to the glass, and there they were. Donovan, Morella, and Seraphine clustered near the porch light, their faces tight and colorless, as if the cold had grabbed hold of them from the inside. It was strange seeing them outside my home, stripped of the confident posture they'd worn my entire life. Strange, but not surprising. When control slips, desperate people cling harder. I opened the security app on my phone and shook my head when Carson reached for the doorknob. "We're not opening it," I said. "We follow the plan." I tapped the microphone icon and my voice echoed through the porch speakers. "If you need to speak to me, you can do it from there." The distance steadied me. The glass door between us felt like the first boundary they couldn't cross. Donovan stepped forward and pounded the door with his fist, shouting for me to come outside. But the authority he used to wear like a second skin wasn't there anymore. His voice wavered, hollowed by fear he didn't try to hide. It was the first moment I realized they weren't fighting me. They were fighting the consequences of their own choices. Morella cut him off and tried to soften the moment, pressing a trembling hand to her chest, as if the cameras that once protected her reputation were still rolling. She called it a crisis, said the media was twisting the narrative, that the Frost name was under attack, and business partners were backing out of deals. She said all of this as though she wasn't the one who turned my wedding into a public execution. Then she begged me to help fix what she called a family emergency. I answered slowly through the speaker, "You disowned me in front of strangers on a live stream. I'm respecting the choice you made." The words seemed to strike something deep in them. Donovan's face darkened. He accused me of destroying them on purpose, of using lawyers and contracts to sabotage the Frost legacy. He shouted that I was standing on the outside while they were crumbling on the inside. For once, his anger didn't intimidate me. It only revealed how fragile his authority had been all along. Then Seraphine, who had been sniffling behind them, stepped closer with tears streaking down her cheeks. At first I thought it was guilt, but the faint red light on her phone told the truth. She was recording. She hadn't come to apologize. She had come to make new content. "Turn off the phone," I said through the speaker. "I can see the light, Seraphine." Her crying stopped, instantly replaced with a startled silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then Morella spoke, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard. She admitted that the disownment letter had never been meant to be final. It was meant to scare me, push me into signing the family property agreement. She said they expected me to panic and cling to them for approval, that humiliation would bring me back in line. Hearing her confess it like that, plain blunt without manipulation, was almost more surreal than the wedding. I answered with calm, "I didn't know I was capable of. I didn't sign, because I knew exactly what you wanted." Carson stepped closer beside me, grounding me, ready to step in if I needed him. Donovan tried one last tactic. He threatened to sue, to expose private matters, to drag me through any court he could find. But before his bravado gathered force, my phone buzzed in my hand. My lawyer's face filled the screen. At his request, I placed the video call on speaker, letting his clear, firm voice spill out onto the porch. He reminded them that any attempt to pressure me, threaten me, or interfere with Frostborn Trust would open them to civil charges. He restated that they signed the disownment voluntarily in public on camera, and that the law held their signatures as binding. Donovan stepped back, as if the words had physical weight, his shoulders shaking. Seraphine lowered her phone. Morella's face crumpled. It was the first time I'd ever seen her cry without an audience. I unlocked the door and opened it halfway. Only halfway. I stood within the frame, as if marking the boundary they would never cross again. Snow drifted around them like ash from something long burned out. "I'm not a Frost anymore," I said. "And unless you're here to offer something other than control or hurt, we have nothing left to discuss." None of them answered. The silence was heavier than any words we'd exchanged. Snow gathered on their shoulders, as if burying the Frost name itself. I closed the door. The click of the lock sounded final, like the shutting of a book I would never reopen. A week passed before I felt my body truly exhale. Carson and I had moved into our new home in Longmont, a place with wide windows and soft morning light that didn't feel filtered through judgment or expectation. The first morning there, sunlight spilled through the curtains in a way I had never seen in the Frost house. It felt gentle, like the world was reminding me that beginnings don't need permission. In the kitchen, the disownment letter hung on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a small mountain peak. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a wound. It was a timestamp, the moment I finally cut the cord they'd been tightening around me my entire life. I pulled it down, smoothing the edges with my thumb, and carried it outside. I had gathered every document connected to the Frosts, the family property contract. They tried to make me sign screenshots of their messages and the original letter they handed me like a curse in red paper. I placed them all into the fire pit, one sheet at a time, feeling the weight of each memory lift as the flames took them. Carson wrapped his arms around me from behind and asked quietly, "Do you regret any of it?" The truth rose effortlessly. "No," I said. "I didn't lose a family, I escaped one." Later that afternoon, my lawyer emailed me confirmation that all filings were complete. Frostborn Trust was now legally sealed. No Frost could touch it, claim it, or even inquire about it. My life was finally my own. News outlets began running stories about the wedding incident, calling it everything from cruel to unthinkable. Donovan's business was hit hard. 3 contracts pulled out, and regulators announced a review of his finances. I wasn't celebrating their downfall, but I recognized something else. Truth has a way of rising, no matter how fiercely people try to bury it. Seraphine posted a public apology, speaking softly into her camera, asking for forgiveness from her followers. But the message she sent me privately was shorter. "You won. I hope it was worth it." I didn't answer. I no longer owed her or any of them a response. That evening, Carson and I drove into the mountains. The sun dipped low, painting the peaks in gold. The car hummed beneath us, steady and strong, a contrast to the chaos we had left behind. When we reached an overlook, I stepped out and let the wind thread through my hair. For the first time in my life, there was no invisible hand tugging at my decisions, no voice telling me who to be. Freedom didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a breath, a deep, steady one I had never taken before. I looked at the mountains, their silent strength stretching into the distance, and whispered to myself, pain doesn't always come from what people do to you. Sometimes it comes from letting them do it for too long. And one day, you finally learn to close the door. Carson took my hand as we walked back to the car. The headlights carved a path forward, and for the first time, the road ahead was one I could choose without fear.